Jal Farajum. Please open your Qur'ans to chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, verses number 75 to 78. Chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, ayat number 75 to 78. For the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومنهم من عاهد الله لئن آتانا من فضله لنصدقن ولنكونن من الصالحين فلما آتاهم من فضله بخلوا به وتولوا وهم معرضون فأعقبهم نفاقا في قلوبهم إلى يوم يلقونه بما أخلفوا الله ما وعدوه وبما كانوا يكذبون. ألم يعلموا أن الله يعلم سرهم ونجواهم وأن الله علام الغيوب. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Every investment that we make brings with it some element of risk. That is the nature of the contracts that we get into. When I want to be able to invest anything, I am hoping that investment will yield some benefit for me and you. But of course, because it is risky by its nature, it could be that we lose our capital. It could be that that thing that we invest into loses the entirety of its market value, and as such, we could end up losing whatever we have invested in, and really that could be all of the assets that we have could be lost by virtue of the extent of the investments that we lose. In the Islamic perspective, risk is something that is extensively debated in the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. To what extent are we permitted to be able to attempt a very risky investment? Am I allowed to be able to risk the entirety of my asset? Am I allowed to be able to risk something that ultimately could put me up on the streets? From one perspective, we are told, the hadith comes from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, الناس مسلطون على أموالهم, that people are allowed to be able to do as they please with their wealth. From another perspective, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have stated, لا غرر في الدين, there is no risk allowed in religion. How can it be both statements true, that I am allowed to be able to make use of the money as I please, but at the same time I'm not allowed to be able to make risk? There are actually three types of risk that we want to be able to talk about tonight. The first type of risk is a type of risk that is permitted in Sharia. The second type of risk is a type of risk that is known as undue risk, a type of risk that is prohibited in Sharia. And then there is a third type of risk in business, which is a spiritual risk. I'm actually playing with fire, but with what? Not my wealth, but with my soul, with my akhirah. These are three different types of risk that our school talks about. It's very important for us to be able to understand the nuances between them and to see how this rule may apply to us in various different circumstances. It may be that actually I'm setting up a business, it's not risking a lot financially, but it's risking a lot in terms of my soul or my akhirah. It could be that the thing that I'm investing in will have no negative effect on my soul, but it is so risky that actually the amal itself, the aqd that I'm getting into, the contract, is actually batil min al-asas. That really with God, it doesn't exist. The contract has no value, and actually it is undone from the outset. And so there is no value with God that comes off the back of this. And so tonight, inshallah, to continue our fiqhi discussions, we're going to try to look at the way in which the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam talk about the matter of risk. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Risk has much reward. And there are many opportunities for us to be able to invest in things that yield a very high potential of reward. We can invest in options, for example, in IPOs, for example. They can be venture capital. There can be foreign emerging markets that we can invest in. And currency trading, high yield bonds. Someone comes to you and says, let's invest in one of these areas. Someone says, you have an expertise, I have capital. Let's put it together and start a business. How do you know from a shar'an perspective whether this act in and of itself is permitted and whether it's too risky and such that the Sharia actually tells us we are not permitted to enter into this aqd? The first thing we have to note is that with any of these rules that fiqh al-uqud or mu'amalat give us, they are only there to protect us. In the vast majority of cases, Islam does not enter into the issue for you. The Sharia doesn't try to curtail you in any way. But only in a few circumstances where maybe we don't think ahead or we don't necessarily realize the blind spots, do these rulings seek to enter into the matter to give us some guidance and some self-restraint that otherwise many of us may not necessarily have. We mentioned in a previous discussion that there are 4 types of rules when it comes to our business laws and our business ethics. For the vast majority of them, there is no restriction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you are free to be able to do as you please. الناس مسلطون على أموالهم. You are free to be able to spend as you please. This is one. A second type of ruling is where we have to go back to a principle. Principle might say, for example, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. If this act, this aqd, this transaction causes excessive harm to yourself or to people, it may not be permissible for you to interact with this act. Number 2. Number 3, sometimes the ruling is that you have to go back to the urf. And the urf will say that this is an illogical act. This is something that we cannot condone. This is not something that a rational person would do. And then the urf determines whether this act is legally allowed in the Sharia perspective. And then 4th, on rare occasions, we have a specific fatwa that will come to us from the Quran, from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and our Maraja al-Kiram have done the istinbat of that. and they've given to us a fatwa and said, this is the ruling in this circumstance. It's one of these four. Bay' al-gharar, when we do a transaction that is risky, it falls into two of these categories. One, it is that we have a principle that tells us that if this act is so risky, I have to be very aware of it and potentially check whether this act is allowed or not. Number two, we often have to go back to the urf, and those people who are in the business or those people with experience, they can say and guide and say this is a wise decision or a very unwise decision. And if the urf tells us that this is a very bad decision in the sharia, then we are obligated to understand what the urf might tell us. So as I said, you might be investing in a stock, you might be opening up a business, you might have a business partner in the community. There is risk when you are investing in anything. You could be opening a business, investing in land, you could be investing abroad. There is risk that Islam tells us we have to be considerate of. One type is spiritual risk. And because we always start with the Quran, we start here by looking at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions spiritual risk from the Quranic perspective. And then inshallah we can build it to the fiqh and the other sides as well. Please open your Qurans to chapter number 9, ayat number 75 to 78. There are 4 ayat here in Surah At-Tawbah that are revealed regarding a particular companion of the Holy Prophet Muhammadin al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. This particular companion came to the Prophet and said to him, Ya Rasulullah, I want you to make dua for me that I become a successful business person. The Prophet cautioned him and said to him, it may not be in your interest if this dua comes true. The man insisted and said, no, whatever you tell me to do, I will do it. You tell me that this is my duty in business, I'll make sure I fulfill it. You tell me I have to be able to pay all of the huquq and look after the people who have rights upon me through my wealth, I guarantee you I will do it. The Prophet said, okay, this is the case. This is what you're telling me. And the Prophet prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this man's business to increase. And it did. Of course, if the Prophet prays for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will listen, inshallah. So, man's property and his business increased. In particular, in Medina al-Munawwara, his business was that he had farms. He actually ended up moving to a larger property in the suburbs of Medina. From there, he transferred to outside of Medina, and he had so many farms and sheep and grazing animals that he became one of the richest people within the city of Medina al-Munawwara. Have a look at these ayat. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ عَاهَدَ اللَّهَ لَإِنْ آتَانَا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And there are those amongst them who have made a covenant with Allah. They said, if you do this, I will do this. Oh Allah, you give me that extra business. With that profit, I make sure I look after people who are in need. If He gives us out of His grace, we will certainly give alms. لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ. We'll do sadaqah. What else? وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And we'll certainly be of the good. So we'll continue to do good deeds. What happened next? Ayah number 76. فَلَمَّا آتَاهُمْ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ. But when Allah gave them out of His grace, they became stingy. وَتَوَلَّوْا وَهُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. And they turned back on their covenant with Allah, and they withdrew from what they had agreed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَعْقَبَهُمْ نِفَاقًا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. So He made hypocrisy to follow as a consequence in their hearts. These ayat were revealed about this companion who had made this promise. By the time he left the city, had such a huge property, had such huge business coming, the Prophet had sent his tax collectors, his zakat collectors, to collect from that man's sheep. The man actually had turned back away from Islam and said, I don't want to give any of the zakat. If I say I'm non-Muslim now, I will give from the jizya tax, which was a lot less, and I won't have to pay a higher level of tax that I would have to pay on my zakat. All along, the Prophet had said to him and warned him, do you really want this? Are you sure you're ready for the responsibility of this bigger business? One element of risk-taking is not simply whether my capital will grow or it will decrease. It's whether I will lose my iman through this. If I'm regular to the Husayniyah and I'm coming for the programs, I'm engaged in the community, I'm praying my salah 5 times a day, I'm fulfilling my wajibat, I'm spending time with my family, looking after my family. But then by virtue of that business growing larger and larger, it takes away from your duties. You are unable to wake up for your Salatul Fajr. You are unable to come to the Husayniyah anymore. You lose your faith, or you lose the family that you have. Was it worth it? Really, in Akhirah, would you put all of that money on one scale, all of that luxury and ease and triumphalism and achievement on one scale, and having missed one salah on the other scale? Believe me, that one salah that you would have missed will be heavier than everything that will come from that. But this is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And I tell you this, that when we speak to many people within the communities, one of the big challenges, especially that the sisters mention time and time and time again, is it is great that my husband is so successful, but we don't see him. We don't see him at home. He doesn't spend time with the family. This is a big complaint, genuinely, from this community, from others, where the sisters say, the guy, he has his work 24/7. Then, there's sports 3 times a week. There's baraza 2 times a week. Everything keeps him out. And maybe we get a couple of hours a week for us and the family. If you're going to grow that business so large that you actually lose what is priority in your life, priority in your deen, in your faith, genuinely, is it worth it? Is that what your life is about? Very interesting. Yesterday we mentioned there are certain duties that come with every type of rizq, right? Wealth, duties are attached to it. If you have power and privilege, there is a responsibility innately attached to it, and so on and so forth. None of these things are the goals of life. Wealth is not the goal of life. Power and position and privilege is not the goal of life. These things are too low to actually be the goals of life. But to actually spend time with the family as a father, as a husband, to raise your children, to be with them, to ensure that they have the understanding of the duties of their life, to actually carry their hand through life, that is an ultimate goal of life. To be able to see your children prosper, to have good ethics, to fulfill their deen, these are the goals of life. So the first type of risk that we have is not a financial issue, it is a spiritual issue. It's a moral issue, that if I'm going to put so much effort in here and be imbalanced and lose on this side, a person has to be very, very aware of that particular matter. And the fact is that Allah actually reveals 4 ayat about this, about one person in Surah At-Tawbah. Just think about that very carefully. We often think that the Quran is just going to tell me about ibadat. It's going to say to me, make sure you pray, have your zakat, go on hajj, amr bil ma'ruf, and nahy anil munkar, give sadaqah. Allah is revealing 4 ayat about one person. Because he grew his business so large, he lost what was in here. This is the first type of risk. The second type of risk and third type of risk are issues that fiqh itself has to be able to deal with. And what we have is a type of risk that is undue risk that should not be undertaken in Islam, and types of risk that are permitted to be taken in Islam. We have these sets of ahadith from Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam. They say, La gharar, no risk. Another hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammadin al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. La tabi' ma laysa indak. You are not allowed to sell that which you don't have. We mentioned in the previous discussion, am I allowed to sell something that I don't have ownership of? Principally, no. But there might be circumstances in which I am allowed. Why? Because it's too risky. If I want to be able to sell something that I don't have yet, it might be risk-worthy, it might not be risk-worthy. Who determines? The urf. If this is something that is normal, then we might return to the urf. If there's a hadith about it, we return back to the hadith and the fatwa from Maraji al-Kiram. Have a look at this hadith about risk and how Ahl al-Bayt alayhimus salam define this risk. Companion by the name of Khalid ibn Hajjaj comes to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, الرجل يجيء فيقول اشترى هذا الثوب وأربحك كذا وكذا. A person comes and he says that I'm going to buy this item and then I want it to be able to increase and then I plan to be able to sell it. So there's a risk, isn't it? It's basically investment. I'm going to buy this item. I don't know whether I'm going to have it. I'm going to sell it on. In the midst, I expect there to be an increase for me. Is it permissible for me to be able to do this? Imam alayhi salam responded, أَلَيْسَ إِنْ شَاءَ تَرَكْ وَإِنْ شَاءَ أَخَذْ. When you're doing these deals, do you have the freedom to pull out of the deal or to take on the deal? If it's something now that you are going to be majboor by, forced into, and there's no way for you to be able to escape the risk that is upon you, the Imam said it's not permissible for you to do. But if you have space to be able to get out of the risk, then it's no problem for you. Man says, I want to buy something, and then maybe I will sell it on when it becomes higher. Imam said, no problem. As long as it's not so risky, I allow you to be able to do it. This is what the Imam mentioned. Now, in another hadith, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, gives a hadith that the fuqaha then used to begin to explain the matter of gharar. He says the following. Gharar, risk, is the following. إِنَّهُ عَمِلٌ مَا لَا يُؤْمِنُ مَعَهُ مِنَ الضَّرَرِ. Risk in Islam, which is not permitted, is an act when you are not safe from the harm of that contract. Undue risk, the types of risk that the Sharia intervenes on and stops you from engaging in, is a type of risk, ma la yu'minu, when you are not safe, ma'ahu min ad-darar, from harm coming to you. The hadith in and of itself requires explanation. What is the meaning of security, safety? And what is the meaning of harm? The fuqaha throughout the eras have tried to explain this hadith. And we've actually seen a growth, a change in the definitions of this hadith. It's very interesting. Let me give you an example. I have a business, and then I say to you, come and invest with me. You don't have any knowledge of what that business is. You don't know the workings of that business, but you have the capital. So I say, I want to grow my business. I want to expand into this market area. I need your capital. But you don't have real knowledge of my business. I have the knowledge of the business. Trust me. This is the business plan. This is how we're going to grow over the next 3 years. Imam alayhi salam said that a risk that you are not safe from harm coming to you is a type of risk that aqd would be batil. So I say to you, invest with me. You don't know what this business is. Are you allowed to invest with me? Someone says, he's ignorant of the business. He has no knowledge of it. It's my area of expertise, but he doesn't have any knowledge as to whether what I'm saying is sound knowledge or not. I could say to him, this is how the business is, this is how it operates, this is the marketplace. He doesn't know. From a Sharia perspective, are you allowed to be able to invest in something that you have ignorance of, that you don't have any knowledge of that matter? Let's have a vote. Hands up, who says yes? Can he invest in a business that he has no knowledge, ignorance of? Hands up, who says yes? For the record, not a single person is putting their hand up. Who says, are you putting your hand up? Yeah? 50-50. He only wants to invest 50% of it instead of 100%. Oh, that's interesting. You've added something in there. Trust in the person. Am I trustworthy? Ya Allah, possibly. I didn't even get a yes. I didn't even get a yes. 50-50. This infernal ratio, 51-49. My business is actually bombing Arsenal. It's a very good business plan. So maybe my team might actually come up. Think about this very carefully. A lot of the businesses that we go into, we have no knowledge of that, right? Let me just give you an example. He comes to me with a tip. He says, listen, this stock is going to blow up. He goes, listen, this AI company, it's going to be huge. I don't know the first thing about AI. But he tells me, it's a sure thing. Listen, in 3 years' time, you're going to be minted. But I don't have any knowledge of it. So I've got my life savings. I've got $10,000. I've got $50,000. I want to invest. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in the hadith, what did he say? He said, gharar, the type of risk that is haram, shar'an, is what? Is where ma la yu'minu, you are not secure from what? Ma'ahu min al-dharar, from its harm. So I have complete ignorance of this business, this stock. He tells me. So I asked again, hands up, who said, yes, I can invest in it? Ahsant. Who says, no, I cannot invest in it? Very interesting. So just for the record, for the sisters, the majority of people said we can't invest in it. At the time of His Eminence, Allama al-Hilli, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, Allama al-Hilli stated that the definition of gharar, risk, undue risk, illogical risk, is based on your ignorance. If you have ignorance of a matter, this is the meaning of the hadith. You are not permitted to invest in something that you are ignorant of. Allama al-Hilli, mashallah, an incredible jurist from the 7th century. After that, majority of our fuqaha began to redefine the notions of risk and opened it up into a different way. Ayatollah Muhammad Jawad Mughniya, he says the following: إن العقلاء يقدمون على الضرر القليل رجاء النفع الكثير. The uqala, intelligent people, people who are normally in this field, such as businessmen and women, يقدمون على الضرر قليل. They don't mind having a little bit of risk and harm, رجاء النفع الكثير, in the hope that it will bring out a lot of gain. For business people, this is ordinary. It's not about ignorance of the stock. It's not about ignorance of whether you know my business and you trust me that I'm telling you. It is normal in business that you try to invest, you put in 10,000 in the hope that it becomes 50,000. That's what business is. That's the root of what business is. That's what the root of all of this is about. If you're going to try to make a profit, you do it for that sake. I don't mind losing 10,000 if I have to. It is what it is. He says the uqala think like this. Again, when we say uqala, we mean people who are rational, experienced in the field that we are talking about. Moral, upstanding, trustworthy people in the field in which we're talking about. He goes further. وَيَشْتَرُونَ الشَّيْءَ الْمَجْهُولَ. And business people ordinarily buy something that they are ignorant of, بِثَمَنٍ لَا يُوَخِّبُونَ مِنْ عَدْلِ مِنْهُ. So long as ordinarily there is no blame on them buying this thing. If I'm a businessman in a particular area and I say, I want to grow my business here, you've got the capital, I've got the expertise, no one's going to blame him if he comes and partners with me. He's completely fine. If I come and give him a stock tip and say, this AI company is going to blow up in 3 years' time, get in now, on the ground, before it becomes so expensive there's no point in doing it, the fact that he trusts me to be able to say it, it's ordinarily that investments are with some harm, but you know that ordinarily we try to speculate to accumulate. You know that this is something that the business community does, then there's no problem in doing it. Can you see? The mujtahid of the previous generation, Allama al-Hilli, defined it by ignorance. If you're ignorant of the business, if you're ignorant of the stock, you can't do it. Since then, the whole notion of the meaning of gharar has changed. It's not about ignorance. It is about the following: due diligence. What do the uqala say? And if there is la yuwakhibuna min adli minhu, there is no blame ordinarily on a person going into this area, investing in this area, then there's not considered to be gharar for you to be able to do so. So here when we say gharar, that the Prophet said no risk, the meaning of risk is where the risk is undue risk, it's unfounded risk. It's risk where there is so much uncertainty, so much ignorance that you cannot logically engage in this particular transaction. Then the Sharia enters in and forbids you. One important one. If there is a speck of deception in the matter as well, then that aqd is batil. If you're dealing with someone on the other side and they're known to be a little bit dodgy, they're known to deceive, or they seem to be giving you a contract where there's not full detail here, it's actually batil min al-asas. There is no contract to speak of. The contract itself is null and void. It is batil from the very foundation of it. Very important. Sometimes we get people who are telling us do this, do that, and we later come to realize that all along what they had told us was not the full thing that they actually had intended. The reality is that contract was actually batil from its foundation. That gets us out of a lot of problems, a lot of disputes from the Islamic perspective. We actually say we don't have to deal with this going forward. It's actually batil from its very foundation. Shaykh al-Ansari, the greatest scholar in the history of Shi'ism by the name, he's called Shaykh al-A'zam, the great Shaykh. He defines gharar in this way. He says, gharar, undue risk, illogical risk that the Sharia stops you from is instituting of risk that leads towards transactional disputes. It's very important. If you can see in advance that this aqd is going to boil over into so much fight, Shaykh al-Ansari says that from the outset, that is batil. Very interesting. Shaykh al-Ansari, he defines gharar this way: the instituting of risk that leads towards transactional disputes, that it will boil over into fights. From the outset, that contract is null and void. He defines risk. Shaykh al-Hilli, Alam al-Hilli defined risk as what? Ignorance. Shaykh al-Ansari defined ignorance as fights are going to come from this contract. Batil. That's it, the contract is over. There's no agreement anymore between you and that person or you and that party from a shar'an perspective. I speak to you as mu'mineen because mu'mineen do business with one another. His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Shaykh Muhsin al-Hakim, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayh, many of the people in this audience might have performed taqleed of Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim. He defines risk in the following way. Risk applies neither to business risk or ignorance. If the contract is misrepresented to you, that the inappropriate is actually appropriate, then this is the Sharia definition of risk. If you are being presented something in a way that looks sound, but actually in and of itself, it was never sound, then that contract is batil min al-asas. It is actually, doesn't exist. There's no such thing as this contract. Even though you've got a piece of paper, it doesn't exist from the Sharia perspective. So here we have to realize that the Sharia is trying to protect you. This is really important. The same way we talk about how, salah is there to make sure that you have this progress in your life. Siyam is there to get you to taqwa. Hajj is there for you to achieve these goals with Allah. The business laws that we have in Islam, many of us, we don't have any knowledge of. But if we had knowledge of it, it would remove many of the problems that we get into in the community and maybe help us between the mu'mineen as well. Islam is trying to protect your wealth. Islam is trying to ensure that you get the best out of your wealth. Trying to remove disputes between mu'mineen so communities don't fragment, so families don't fragment. This is the purpose of having these contract laws and knowing them in advance before we get into contracts, before we get into investments, so that we can actually resolve these matters in the best of ways, inshallah. So we have three types of risk. Spiritual risk, risk that we are allowed to be able to do, and risk that we are not allowed to be able to do. The type of risk where the Sharia then intervenes on is where the risk is so high that is an undue type of risk that we're going into, that there's a deception in this type of contract, that we have so much problem that is likely to come out of this contract. It's going to boil over into fights. The Sharia intervenes and says, you have to consider this batil, and we have to review whether we can actually make this transaction or not. One hadith comes to us from our sixth holy Imam, Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Look at the way Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam explains risk to us. Imam alayhi salam, companion comes to him, says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I want to be able to invest in this business. I'm not sure about it. Can you do the istikhara for me? Imam does the istikhara and it comes out bad. He tells the companion, istikhara comes out bad for you. Companion goes away, and a year later, he comes back to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and says, Imam, I turned a huge profit in this business. Do you remember you took out the khira for me and it came back bad? I did it anyway, and I gained so much money, more than I could possibly imagine from it. Imam said, yes, you did. You're right. Do you remember on such and such a day that you spent the whole night working and you missed your Salatul Fajr? He said, yes. He said, that's why the khira came back bad. That one fajr that you were going to miss was God's way of saying, it's better you don't do this business. That's how risky it was. Risk here was actually going against Allah's decree for you. Can you see? This is the meaning. Often you and I, when we want to be able to make investments, we're not sure. And then we make the khira. And we want to do tawakkul on God's decision. It's really important that we trust God's decision. God's vision for you and I is more than simply amwal. Yeah? So for you and I, risk has to be understood in all of these different ways. When Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam give us guidance, when Allah gives us guidance, it is ultimately for our own benefit and not for us to think that God is just trying to strangle our sustenance from us or try to hold us back from success in dunya. No, God is interested in the success of your dunya and your akhirah. On a night like this, we are but hours away from the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, his departure from this world. In the last hours of the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, people thronged to his house in order to be able to visit him. Can you imagine if your Mawla was going to depart in a few hours? Wouldn't you try to go to his house for one last ziyarah? Wouldn't you try to see his face one last time? Wouldn't you want to be able to just hold on to his hand and ask him something, or maybe just ask him to make dua for you or give you one last piece of advice? Can you imagine the number of people that thronged to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Kufa? Can you imagine the number of orphans that were waiting outside that house, waiting to hear the news of their master, the one that would spend the nights looking after them? It got to such a point that so many people were going to the house that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam eventually had to make a decision and close the door of that house and say, my father is too weak to be able to accept any more visitors. Imagine if you were one of those who had not managed to visit Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Eventually the people left. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam forbade them. The narration says that the companion Asbagh bin Nubata knocked on the door and knocked on the door and knocked on the door and refused to leave. He insisted, I want to see my master for one last time. And it is said that Asbagh bin Nubata is the last companion to see the face of Ali ibn Abi Talib before his passing from this world. He enters into the room, and immediately Asbagh begins to break down in tears. He's never seen his master like this. This is Ali ibn Abi Talib that lifted the gates of Khaybar. Do you know what he sees? He sees Ali ibn Abi Talib. The poison has run through his body so much that the rag that is around his head covering his wound has turned green from the pus that is flowing out from that wound. And Ali ibn Abi Talib's body is moving left and right. He is writhing in pain, struggling from the amount of poison that is in his body. Asbagh breaks down in tears in front of him. Do you know how Amir al-Mu'mineen responds? He says, oh Asbagh, why do you cry? Your Imam is still with you. Why do you cry? Asbagh says, he laments. He says, I have not seen you like this. How do I see you in this state? How can I not control myself and cry for your situation? And Imam gives Asbagh some final pieces of advice. After Asbagh leaves, it is now just the family with Ali ibn Abi Talib. If this is the way Asbagh was when he saw Amir al-Mu'mineen, can you imagine how Zaynab and Kulthum were when they saw Ali ibn Abi Talib? Zainab had already lost her grandfather. She had already lost her mother. Can you imagine now how she is going to be when she loses her father? Amir al-Mu'mineen begins to give his wasiyyah to his family. It is said that he places the hands of every one of his family members in the hand of Imam al-Hasan. But there is one family member who is left over. It is said that Abu Fadl al-Abbas looks towards his father. He says, "Oh Father Ali, am I not your child as well? Am I not to be given in the hand of Imam al-Hasan?" It is said that he places the hand of Abu Fadl into the hand of Imam al-Hussein. He says, "Your duty is with this son of mine. Your life has been there to serve this son of mine. There will come a day when I cannot be there to defend him. You are my defense on my behalf, O Abu Fadl al-Abbas." I want you to imagine that if this is how Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen spoke to Abu Fadl al-Abbas, I want you to imagine what he must have whispered into the ears of Zainab. "Zainab, I'm going to depart, but my wasiyyah to you is for you to bear patiently. They will attack you in every single way, but you have to bear patiently and lead the caravan. You are the one that they will say that when you speak inside Kufa and Sham, they will say it as if Ali is speaking. You have to represent me. I take you towards the 10th of Muharram." It is said that when Abu Fadl Abbas departed for the river Euphrates, Zainab called out to him, "Oh Abbas, my brother, wait. All this time, I remember that my father used to tell me there will come a day when they will tear my hijab from me, when my arms will be bound in chains, when I will be forced from city to city and paraded. I never understood and imagined how this day would come. But oh Abbas, now that I see you departing from the caravan, I know the time of Zainab has arrived. I know the time of Zainab has come. And what my father Ali told me will now come to pass." ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا علي. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا علي.